Hey there guys, and welcome to this video on potable water. And so first you need to know the difference between potable water and pure water, because there is certainly a difference. Also, you need to know how that we actually produce potable water from freshwater sources and from saltwater sources, because those processes are actually different. So let's take a look straight away now. Okay, so first of all, potable water, what does it actually mean? Well, potable water is water that is safe for us to drink. Now, people get confused between potable and pure. Pure water is safe for us to drink, but potable water does not have to be pure, is the answer, right? So, pure water is something which literally contains nothing aside from water, right? However, potable water, we can actually have small levels of minerals and ions and stuff like that, such as metal ions. In fact, that's why, when you buy bottled water, it's called mineral water. It's because it contains minerals, right? It's not pure water, okay? So, and also, another thing which is important for potable water is that it contains no microorganisms or very few non-harmful microorganisms, right? Because a lot of water, which you just find, actually contains a lot of microbes, and those could do us damage. And so for potable water, we need to get rid of those. Okay, so then we have the argument between fresh water and salt water, right? The point is that on Earth you have two main types of natural water, those being fresh or salt, right, or seawater. So fresh water basically is water which is found in things like rivers or glaciers or lakes or whatever it's going to be, right, or underground. And those do not contain many microbes, and they contain a very low amount of salts and other minerals, right? And that's why they're not called salt water. Okay, that is actually easier for us to treat before we can drink it than salt water is, right? Or seawater. The salt water actually has high levels, obviously, of dissolved substances, such as salts, and also generally it contains more microbes than fresh water does, which is another problem, right? And so these two types of water are treated in different ways. And depending on which part of the world you're in, then you will either be close to a freshwater source or a saltwater source, right? For example, in London, which is where I'm from, you have the River Thames, right? It is a river, of course, right? We're served by Thames Water. That is a fresh water source. Whereas if you live somewhere like Spain, a lot of the time in Spain, the water is taken directly from the sea or from other saltwater sources, and it needs to be treated differently. Okay, so let's have a look at a quick rundown of those. So fresh water first. Fresh water, it needs to go through two phases, basically, right? You need to remove all the solids from it, right? And that's by a process called filtration. Just like you already know with filter paper, it's basically that, but on a much larger scale, right? You don't need to remember this diagram in detail at all. But basically, water is passed through these filter beds, and the filter beds remove the solid particulates, and therefore you get water going through it without the solids in it, which is great. Secondly, you have sterilization, okay? Sterilization, the purpose of sterilization is to kill microbes, right? Is to kill microbes. Well, how do we sterilize? Okay, well, sterilizing can be done either by chlorine, right, or I'm going to put slash and ozone, right? Generally, ozone or chlorine are used. Another thing which can be used in order to sterilize water is ultraviolet light, right? Or ultraviolet light. Those three things all have antimicrobial properties. They kill microbes, and so that is great. Right, now let's have a look at saltwater treatment, right? Saltwater treatment, there are two different treatments, or two different types of treatment that you carry out for your saltwater. The first one being distillation. Alright, now distillation is basically where you evaporate things and then you condense them, okay? And the purpose of this is to separate the water molecules from the salt. And so this diagram is more complicated really than it needs to be. Basically, seawater comes in, right? This is actually a condenser, but water is allowed to go through this coil and then into a heater and down to the bottom, right? It's heated up here, and so your seawater actually boils. Now what happens is the solids, the salts, there will be solids in there as well, but the salts are basically left where they are. The water molecules rise up like so, right? And then they condense over here where it's cold, okay? They condense here where it's cold, and they turn back into water, and then they leave, and that is your desalinated water. Desalinated means lack of salt, right? So you've got rid of the salt. So that's distillation. Now, the other method is reverse osmosis, and it's called as such because it is pretty much the exact opposite of osmosis. Because if you think, and this is really biology, in osmosis, water would move from a high water potential to a low water potential, right? So from pure water into seawater like that, okay? Instead, what we do is we use a semi-permeable membrane just like before, but we actually mechanically force the opposite to be true by applying energy. And the way you apply energy is via this piston, which applies a massive pressure, which actually pushes water molecules across a membrane, but the salts can't go across the membrane, right? So it stays where it is. So you've got all salts in here, right? Blah, 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 blah. But the water is actually pushed through the membrane into the pure water, and then it's collected out the other side. And so that is pretty much the opposite of osmosis, and obviously it requires energy, whereas actual osmosis does not. Now, importantly, the saltwater treatments both require a lot of energy, and they're both very expensive, right? If you had the choice of turning fresh water or salt water into potable water, you would pick fresh water every time because it is way cheaper, right? Filtration is just way cheaper than doing something like a large scale distillation or a large scale reverse osmosis. Okay, they are far more expensive, and so that is basically that. Okay, so we're going to stop there. I hope that made sense. If you do have any questions, feel free to put them in the box below or send me an email. As usual, please like and subscribe because that really does help me out, and I look forward, of course, to seeing you in the next video.